once again. Welcome to the Perceptional, elevating all your senses, expanding your curiosity. So plug in now as we welcome your host, Dr. James Denito.
Look at you. You're back. Episode number 6. You must be curious, and that's the objective of this whole program. Today, we have another guest, and today's guest is a meteorologist as well as a banker, specifically Treasury banking. And so we're going to hear some insights into the weather. We've done a show about weather already, but this time we're going to hear insights into the National Weather Center and how meteorologists predict weather and what we can learn on our own to figure out how we might be more in control of our day based on what the weatherman is now telling us or not. As far as banking, Wava Keeling is with us today, and that's going to be our main objective is starting with banking, and that is a big thing because our economy is in shambles right now from the dear ones leading everything. So we're going to see what we can do to stay ahead of any economic turmoil. So let's start with introducing Wava Keeling, and you have been raised in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and tell everybody where you live now and how long you've been up there.
Hey, so thank you for having me. I'm really excited to dive into all of this. Got lots of good information here, and so to kind of go into where I live now, I live in Durant, Oklahoma, so some people don't really know where that's at. If you just go north of the highway, just across the river, once you get into Oklahoma, that's where Durant is. Our big landmark is we have a giant casino by Choctaw. So everyone's like, oh, now I know where Durant is. So that's where I live now. Been there for probably about 7 years. Good location. It is a smaller town because a lot of people not knowing what Durant is, it's still growing. But we're a good distance from Dallas. So my husband and I like living there because if we want to escape down to Dallas, we're just about an hour or so away. So it's nice.
And especially they made the highway so that you can get to the casino in barely an hour. Nobody seems to have noticed how much the highways have been improved. And it wasn't to get to Durant. I'm sure it was so they can get everybody to the casino faster.
Casino. Yeah, that's
and if I'm not
important.
mistaken, didn't the casino contribute to the highway construction even in that area around them?
Yeah, absolutely. It was important for them because they wanted to have decent traffic flow to get there. I mean, and they've got all sorts of entertainment that occurs there too. They have big names that come in to have concerts. So they wanted to make sure, of course, people wanting to go in and out, that it was easy for them to flow into the casino there because that's important.
Which brings me my first question. Do the casinos, especially Indian reservation ones, bank in the normal banking systems, or do they have their own way of dealing with their money?
So that is a good question, and it's really up to them. So there are banks that strictly just deal with native funds. Now, where I work, we actually do bank some of the larger tribal nations. We don't technically keep everything or the whole entire relationship because of they have a lot that they handle. So, but they can use a community bank if they want. It's completely up to them. It just depends on the bank that they choose to use. Can it handle the type of funds that they have bringing in?
So there are a lot of differences in the types of banks. Mm-hmm. Most people know there's credit unions versus banks. But aren't there some different types of banks? Like I think one term would be a commercial bank versus savings and loan. Is that one difference I have, right? Or is there?
Technically, yes. So there actually are lots of type of categories of banks. It just depends on what you as either a customer or what you're looking for. So there are some banks that they like to categorize themselves as a community bank. And like you said, there are some banks that are more commercial. There are some that strictly just concentrate on wealth management, that focus on your retirement and just savings in general to help you build that money over time. There are banks that are just strictly private banks and only handle elite customers that have large amounts of money that want to keep their information private and everything else and have their own private banker. I'm sure like a celebrity or something like that. So you've got multiple categories. And like I said, there are even some banks that strictly handle tribal funds, like we were talking about with Choctaw. So,
okay. Now, the other question that comes to mind is you're in a small town by some standards, and there's a lot of towns around the world, but certainly in our country, that are losing their banks. The banks have branches, or maybe that was the only bank there. And I read some articles about the decline, how many of these banks are being shut down and people have to drive. Is that a problem that we should be worried about, you think, or is that just business that the banks have to do that to keep their spreadsheets looking good? Why are small town banks closing at numbers that we're seeing that should draw our attention?
I think this is just my personal opinion, but just from what we've been learning over time, because we had to get the bank that I work at, there was a conversation had when, for example, Silicon Valley Bank, when they shut down, that did cause a little bit of panic, and they're a larger bank too. So we had to understand the reasons why a bank like that shut down, what happened, what the process was behind it. So I think when it comes to these smaller banks, there's a couple of things that do contribute to that. So what keeps a bank afloat is you've got to have your customers' deposits. Deposits is what keeps a bank healthy, and of course, loans as well. If you have a healthy loan to deposit ratio, that's what really keeps that bank afloat. And basically, in a nutshell, there's lots of other factors too. I could dive into bonds as well that help support that ratio, but that's really the main factor. So if you have a smaller bank, and then let's say there's a bigger bank down the road that kind of takes over into town, well, it comes to now sometimes advertising. People get drawn to more of the larger bank. I'll use, for example, I guess I really shouldn't drop a name, but it'll just say a larger commercial type bank. They're able to possibly offer higher rates, more rewards on things like that, maybe a better rate on a loan. And a smaller bank may not be able to fully support that, especially over time if you start to see customers withdraw their funds and go take it to that larger bank. And then that can kind of create that little bit of a struggle with the smaller bank. And then over time, that can start to deplete it there. And then sometimes a bank, if no other bank can come in to help bring funds to it, then it'll kind of just start to slowly die, you could say, and then it'll have to shut down. Or you might see maybe another bank will buy into it, then change the name. We've had that actually happen where I live in Durant. There was one bank that wasn't doing so great, and then another name came in and bought it out and was trying to revive it, you could say. So, but sometimes when people leave a bank, they have their reasons. They just don't like the service anymore. They don't feel like they were maybe getting treated as well. So that could be one big contributor there. Just the fact of dangling a carrot in front of a customer's face is like, well, this is what I can offer you. That's a little bit better. So when you have people start leaving your bank, taking their money, that can kind of hurt a branch a little bit.
You're in a division of the bank, Treasury Management, I think it was called.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference between that and the U.S. Treasury Department?
That's a good question. So my title is I'm actually a Treasury Management Officer, or some people, the old title used to be Cash Management. So I'm kind of more of a consultant to business owners versus if you're going to compare my position to U.S. Treasury handles the funds nationally, for the U.S., and they control the cash flow, what happens with the money, everything else. In my position on a micro scale, I'm more of a consultant to a business owner because I want to learn about how that business works. I need to know the ins and outs of their cash flow, their accounts payables, receivables, and I basically diagnose with their functionalities if they have any little aches and pains, issues. That's where I present to them Treasury services and basically just help things function a little bit better for that business. So I'm not necessarily handling their cash. I'm not telling them what to do. I just come in to assist and just kind of make things run smoother. It's technically what the U.S. Treasury Department does too, but they handle and have more control versus someone just in my position, what we do. Like I said, we're just more consultants.
The way a bank has to understand its own pulse, its own stability, I assume there's metrics. I was thinking of what questions here. Is it based on the percentage of savings, or is it the borrowing volume, or the average daily balance that somebody keeps in their account? Or does a bank measure economic stability by other metrics? Do you need to focus on the economic stability of the country and need to have your finger on the pulse of that too, or you guys just focus on more internal metrics to see how balanced your sheets are, so to speak?
So we have internally a great team of people that support the bank. The roles that they hold are very important. I think it's actually a factor of both of those things. They look and monitor internally how we are functioning and then what's going on externally. So sometimes you'll see banks run promotions of, hey, we're offering for this short period of time a money market account for this percentage if you're able to bring in new money. So sometimes banks will do that to have a draw to bring people in to increase their deposits, because sometimes paying somebody, let's say 2% on a money market account is cheaper than having to borrow money to hold funds, because right now I think borrowing cash from another bank is like 4.25%. So it's cheaper to pay somebody to bring in their money versus having to borrow it from elsewhere. But I know that and this is really any bank in general, you always are running risk models just to see what could happen. They'll run models 20, 30 years out just to throw in random factors out there to see what could possibly happen if all of a sudden, let's say people decide to pull their deposits out. What would happen to us as a bank in general? So they'll run these forecast models, you could say, just to kind of see how we would handle that, what we would do, what the protocol would be. So I think internally that's kind of how they monitor that. They're just constantly watching what the worst possible scenario could be, how we would handle it. And again, that's really any bank in general. I think they just have that protocol there. But then just watching the economy on the outside, they try and make sure that they keep up with what other banks are offering for rates, offer good advice for customers too. One big factor that we have right now is we're just trying to educate people on what to do with their funds. One scary thing is majority of Americans don't even have a savings account right now. Everyone's living paycheck to paycheck. So we always encourage that you want to have a savings account or at least funds saved up to where, let's say if you lose your job or we have another COVID situation where everyone's having to work from home, you want to be able to support yourself for 2-3 months without having to use your credit card or anything else, or just have that cash backup. And not a lot of people have that anymore. So I know our community bank, we want to educate our customers too, besides just trying to sell them services or bring in their deposits. We're just educating is super important.
So, Wava, would you give us as much as you're comfortable with telling us what bank you're with so people can have an understanding as to the credibility of your insights?
Yeah, absolutely. So we technically are still considered a community bank. And the nice part about where I work is we want to continue to have that community feel. We've always had our doors open to where we want to be able to help a customer come in if they need a $1 or $2 million loan, or just Farmer Joe Brown down the road needing a little loan for a new plow for his tractor. So we still want to be able to help everybody that we can still have that community feel. But our bank is growing pretty nicely and we're still remaining very healthy. Right now, our assets, we're sitting over $15 billion. And we've got locations in only Oklahoma and Texas, but we do service customers that are outside of our states. And we have a little over 70 locations right now. It's either 72 or 75 because we've opened up a few recently. So I can't exactly remember the total number, but we're just a little over 70 for actual locations.
And folks, even though she's got a management position in Treasury management, when she went into the bank, she didn't start as a teller because of her mathematics background. She started as the personal assistant to the chief financial officer. So she had the keys to the kingdom very early, and so she has great insights and sat at the round table of everybody who is at the upper echelon of banking. So she's going to have a pretty good insight and a very accurate insight. Now, you mentioned about people losing the ability to put savings away, and is that I know that's a measurement, a concerning one about our economy. What's the single most thing that if a banker had to look at all their values to see how strong their bank was, would it be the amount of savings they have, or is there some other measurement that you can say, well, still that's good, that's our best measurement no matter how bad the economy is? Is there something like that?
So again, it's really important to have that ratio to keep it healthy with your loans that you have out versus the deposits that you have that are helping support that. So a bank really can't loan out money without having it. But there are different ways besides just deposits to have that. Some banks will sometimes just obtain bonds as well to help support that loan ratio. So you don't want to have more money loaned out than what you have deposit-wise. So if you start to see that gap get a little bit closer and closer, you'll have banks have that initiative that go, okay, we need to bring in more deposits, and that they'll make that more of an initiative with bankers or people like me in my Treasury position. We try and bring in business to have customers move their banking operations from wherever they're at now to us, but sometimes they'll have initiatives like that, and then they'll tell the loan officers, hey, let's slow down a little bit on loans unless it's really important. You know, we can grant the smaller loans, but if we have to do a couple $1 million loan, we got to kind of go through the protocol here, make sure if this is really necessary for that customer, because we're always going to evaluate too if that's important for the customer as well. But no matter what, even with that loan to deposit ratio being close, or if there's a larger gap, there's still a power in what the people can do. So kind of I'll circle back to Silicon Valley Bank, that they overnight it seemed like they just tanked. So they were more on the heavy side with the money that they had. It was actually more bonds than anything, and they were more of a technology supported bank. So they kind of banked more of technology companies. Because of the media, they had put out a little bit of bad news about Silicon Valley because they were having some internal issues there. People panicked, and literally within that day, most of those people came and pulled their money out because they had that fear that they were going to lose their money. So if I have $100 in a checking account, if your bank crashes, you're not going to lose that money. The bank doesn't, your money just doesn't disappear overnight. It's still there. Usually there's already a backup plan that another bank is going to obtain that name. So you can still go in the next day and get your money out. But people don't fully understand that. So there's that quote unquote panic that these people had that banked at Silicon Valley. So they ran in, pulled all their money out, and that's really what killed Silicon Valley Bank. If everyone just left their money alone, that means Silicon Valley would have been able to still support themselves, get themselves out of the hole that they were in, and they would have actually been fine. But because word got out that something was happening, things were in trouble, people panicked.
So people can move their money with their phone. Just
Yep.
a few touches. Nobody has to stand in line where they used to close the doors to the bank and you couldn't get in physically. They now have to be able to block people digitally from getting their money out. And did that bank even try that? Or should people worry that if they do want to create a run, that's their right to have a run on the bank? You think a bank might be able to block you digitally from getting your money out if things get really bad?
I mean, you could, but legally you can't. It's that person's money. So usually ahead of time, let's say we'll put ourselves in a situation where there is a bank that is slowly dying. Usually this is anticipated way ahead of time. Negotiations are usually made with another bank. They'll say, okay, I'll buy out your branches. You know, we need a location in your area anyway. So a letter will then go out to all of the customers that says, hey, this is Bank A. We're going to actually be changing our name under new ownership. They'll use professional wording, something like that says we will then be called Bank B. And they will set a time frame that says we will transition over on this date, because by law, customers have to be notified a certain amount of time before changes are made about something like that. So there might be maybe a 12-hour gap because it's just overnight process with the new bank obtaining the accounts, changing everything online, just when it comes to the technology aspect. And that's usually where you will see people have that blackout time where they'll try and log into their online banking, but it'll say, sorry, we're closed for the minute because we're switching things over. Or they'll say maybe account maintenance. But then that customer, once that period is done, then they'll log back in. Everything will still look the same, and then they can still have access to their funds. But really, a bank isn't going to throw up their hands and say, no, you're not taking your money. But anyway, resetting back, a bank can't tell a person, no, you can't take your money. It's still...
They can just delay you getting your money.
We can delay it.
But
and that's usually the only time you'll see that delay is when when a name is transitioning over to a different bank. Which that I'm hoping that maybe answered the question a little bit. I've kind of maybe gone off a little bit to a side road there, but I guess I'm summing down to there's a power in what people can do for a bank. So,
so people measure the strength of their finances by trying to see how much money they have to live each month, so to speak, and it's a much different future that the bank has to go by. They've got to have enough money for people to make it for months and months out if there is any number of different scenarios instead of living day to day where one bad day and the bank goes into a negative cash flow balance, so to speak. Banks make money by charging interest on things, but the majority of ways I think banks make money is by their investments of the money that they hold. I understand banks can invest in life insurances. They can invest in annuities and various things. Is there rules to how much a bank can invest in something like a stock market versus bonds versus treasuries, or are they allowed to put money everywhere? Because I think the bank that you were talking about was Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. They had way too much of their money invested in one category that led to the instability. Mm-hmm. So, like for your bank, what is the biggest thing that they invest in if there was one category at all that they feel secure about?
That's a good question, and I truly I don't want to say understand it. I can't answer that fully because that's probably more full disclosure from an executive level, and that I actually do not know. But I know that it's not all, you could say, a melting pot into one category like Silicon Valley Bank was invested in these technology companies. Our bank has been very smart about making sure everything is more spread out in case something does happen in that one particular category, that there is still a healthy balance amongst the others. Like I said, we're more of a community bank, so they try and keep things more on the local aspect versus branching it out further beyond what is too far out of a reach for what is past our comfort level. That makes sense, but
what entities plural is the overlord to your banking system more than the other? Is it a state level or a federal level, just one or the other, or is it pretty much an equal mixture? Does one oversight the other?
There's certain rules that every bank has to follow anyway, and we do follow rules on a state and federal level. One big thing is like FDIC coverage. So FDIC, they come in and will, audit our bank and make sure everything is running how it should. If there are certain entities that aren't following rules that are banking with us, and they get audited by FDIC and get a letter and everything else, just to make sure that you're strictly following just the protocol there for what the guidelines are supposed to be.
Okay. We're, as a nation and as a world, becoming more and more electronic, more digital. And the digital currency that we call cryptocurrency on a network called the blockchain is not going to go away as much as we can ponder whether it was truly started by an individual in Japan or whether it was actually started by some government or big financial entity and made to look a certain way. But it's become very complex. I have tried, and I'm invested even in an up-and-coming blockchain company. But and by the way, the state of Texas is so focused on keeping up with blockchain. We have our governor several years back making a commitment to make Texas the leading state and entity in the world at embracing blockchain to do business on, banking, et cetera. Most of the government entities, like the county clerk's offices, where you go get your marriage certificate or your land deed. I understand now with all the counties in Texas that we are now past 90% of that. All that data is digitized, being moved into a blockchain type of technology. So, and as Texas is, what are we, like the 8th or 9th largest economy in the world, something like that. If we as a financial entity this big recognize that this system, so we're going to get back to I got off track here, I'm sorry. The digital currency question, I realize it got ahead, the cart in front of the horse has to be preceded by understanding of blockchain. We're not going to do a show on that today. That is a future show, and we have some amazing people coming on about that. So the blockchain technology that Texas is leading the world with is a fairly complex situation, but the foundational principles are it needs an internet to run. It is a form of communication, but why is the world enamored with blockchain? Probably the biggest thing is that it has a greater degree of security. The inability for our institutions to deal with fraud, which you were telling me a little bit out earlier, so we can just have a response to you in a minute about how bad that is and what everybody needs to do to protect themselves more from the criminals out there. The new form of employment is to steal people's money. So criminality is one of the things that the blockchain will give us. Perhaps it's more importantly than anything, it's the security that we all want, where we don't have prying eyes seeing what we're doing. So ultimately, I think cryptocurrency is going to be the new form of cash. And now this brings us into central bank digital currency, CBDC. People are scared of this because they feel it'll use blockchain, but the government will be the creator of this coinage and decide its value to us, and we all should get dollar for dollar if they move our current money system completely into digital format on this. But the fear is that the government, having been the creator of this particular form of cryptocurrency that they're going to control, may be able to be the overlord that says to you when you can use your money, if you've been a good person or not. So this is the fear and why we don't have digital currency right now. The closest you're getting is the fact that you trust your credit card and that most transactions are not being done with even checks and cash. It's all being done by online banking, transfers, and being done with a digital format even at the credit card level. That's now your debit card, so to speak. So is your banking system preparing for digital currency or even just going to blockchain, being you're in another state, as your primary thing, or you guys just begin to talk about it? Where's the mindset coming on digital currency for you guys? Are you there yet, or you still think we got some time?
It'll still be a while. I'm not saying that they're not talking about it. It's definitely something that is being looked into, research is being done, et cetera, et cetera. But I can't imagine this is something that we're going to jump into in the next year or so. There's still a lot that goes into this cryptocurrency. I was attending, there's this Texpo conference that happens once a year. It's actually a Treasury conference. And there was a session during this where these were actual cryptocurrency professionals. We had some people, it was basically just a giant room discussion. There was some people that had made a lot of money doing cryptocurrency, just got really lucky with the system, just tweaking with numbers and everything else. All the way to, there was a gentleman that was on the board there that actually works for Fort Worth, and he was part of the team that set up Fort Worth's Bitcoin system because they were the first city in the U.S., and I think maybe, I don't want to say in the world, but at least I know in the U.S., Fort Worth was the first one to set up a Bitcoin machine. And that was actually back in April of 2022, last year. So there was a lot of discussion around it, but the fact is there's still a lot that there are some uncertainties about it. It's new. The government's still trying, like you said, get a grasp on more and understanding on how this will work. Really, the biggest thing is monitoring it too. So they said that it still is going to take a while before we'll start to see more and more entities moving towards using cryptocurrency or things like Bitcoin or anything like that. So it's definitely being watched for sure, but it's still going to take a little while before we just start diving into it.
If I'm looking at a website I go to buy something online, we're seeing more and more where when you get to the pay window, checkout window, you can see your credit cards, even a debit card offer, and then you can actually now start seeing or pay with crypto and maybe specifically Bitcoin they'll ask you for. And so people who are aware of cryptocurrency, we don't have to tell them how to do that. Everybody's become familiar with how you can move that transaction around. When you see the value of a bank that's still using our currency system, and then we can say, hey, is your bank going to do cryptocurrency? The only reason people need a bank to deal with cryptocurrency is they got to start somewhere with money to put it into the blockchain crypto system. And then when they want to take it out and turn it into real money again, that portal is still going to be a bank in most cases on here. So I can see that there might be some logic where your bank is allowing cryptocurrency to move through its ledgers, but for what benefit other than it's learning how to interact with it better, monitoring it? Will we see a day when someone comes into the lobby of the bank and says, I want this in crypto, and they give you their hard wallet digitally, and you are transacting that for them instead of them going online like to Coinbase or something like that? So your bottom line is, though, we still got a few years before I think our country has to be worried about being pushed into a digital coin system, right?
Yeah, it'll still be a while.
Okay.
At least that's what I had learned from the conference that I attended with these experts that were at least going around this discussion.
Okay. And it's a system that may be more than anything to protect us. So you guys, matter of fact, you just attended some conferences, but so fraud is bigger than ever in terms of banking, and people are being duped not just by a fake email anymore or text. What's some of the most sophisticated ways that is fooling even the smartest people to give up money from their bank accounts?
I mean, it's a multitude of factors. So I'm trying to think of what would be a good one here. So, I mean, there's everything from, because I deal with a lot of these business entities. And so these hackers or these fraudsters will hack into one of these companies' vendors' emails, and then they'll email one of our business customers or a business customer in general and say, you're behind on a payment. We've changed our account information to this. Please send a payment immediately. You're behind. And it causes that panic from that customer because they're like, you don't want to owe money to somebody. You don't want to make this vendor upset that you've been doing business with for a while. So I'll just start sending these people money. I want to say probably more on the advanced factor. We don't necessarily have hacking into online banking. It's more of these hackers or these fraudsters are able to obtain your login information by just manipulating, communicating with you. So if you want to get really down to the most advanced level of that, it's just they're talking to you directly and then they're getting that information from you. So, and it's actually sad to see people get taken advantage of like that. But that's just moving forward. We're just trying to educate people more just to be smarter about it, ask questions, things like that. With whenever you see these changes come across to you, someone's directing, hey, you owe me money. We need to change this information. Send me money immediately. Raise question about it. It's okay to say no and double check it. With fraud, what we've been seeing too, with the sessions that I've had to sit through and listen to these lawyers go over these cases that they've been having to work, it's been interesting to see too where it really started to spike with fraud is right when 2020 hit, because everyone's having to stay at home. So I don't know if this is just more people trying to figure out a way to steal money or whatever, get income. But the chart that they showed us with fraud cases, it was just at a pretty steady level. And then right when 2020, when COVID hit, it just skyrocketed, and it's still staying up there. So it's kind of more of banks now just doing a due diligence, just trying to keep up and educate customers and offer fraud protection services, things like that, just to get it under control, because it's gotten just incredibly bad.
Okay. And yeah, when she says that we saw this spike when everybody was told to go home, basically, if you're still working for the same company and you're from home, then there's no net loss or gain of jobs on there. But many people left their companies, or those who were home came up with all these new ideas, either become a criminal, which they've done by the millions, or put your perversions and stupid things on and make money by other people sitting at home having nothing to do, paying you for that privilege of watching all that. So it's a whole new economy, millions of people in both of those there. Don't get me started on what that means about this future of our economy. What I want to get into with the security here, though, is I would like to have a button people can push on their computer that send an electric fatal shock out of the computer of the person talking to you at that moment, and we might be able to remedy the problem, because there is no way of catching those people and no real punishment set up for them. So that's until we do that. So does your bank reimburse people for their money that was stolen this way, or that's just gone, it's gone?
There's a protocol, and fraud is handled in different manners with personal funds versus business funds. And it depends on how that money had left the bank too. So normally our bank, if it's within a reasonable amount of money, so if it's like $1,000, $2,000 that was lost, normally we will just give the customer back that money, even though the bank, it wasn't our fault that lost the money, but we'll still be nice to help you out, give you your money back, and our fraud department will do the best to try and recover it. So if it was sent by a wire or an ACH, we try and retract it or pull it back. Sometimes if it's a check, it's gone, it's lost cause there. We do actually have bank account insurance as well to cover things like that. So if it's a smaller business, like a mom and pop shop, and they can't really afford to lose $1,500, but to us at the bank, that's a minuscule amount, so we'll help that business out. Like I said, we're a community bank, so we want to help people. But we've had, there have been cases, and this is where our fraud lawyer had come into play. There have been situations where there have been hundreds of thousands of dollars lost, and sometimes even into the millions, because this has been something that's been happening over time. That's a bit more of a sensitive subject. So and that's not just a matter of one transaction, it's multiple transactions over time. Normally then that's worked out, and then there's legalities that get pulled into it and everything else. So every situation is different. Normally when I'm having to talk to customers about fraud services and just how fraud works in general, they always forget in their mind that your bank account works differently than your credit card. Because if you see a transaction on your credit card that you're like, oh, I didn't go to Ulta and spend $250 or whatever store in general. You can call Visa real quick and say, my credit card number has been stolen. That transaction's not mine. They can immediately just nix it off. Because like you said, this is just air money at this point. We can completely eliminate that out. It's a little bit different when it's money that's already left your bank account. It's handled differently. So I try and explain to the customer that it's not like we can snap our fingers and get your money back. We can give you your money back because it's coming out of our pocket, but we have to have a talk too with that customer about how that money got lost. What are your behaviors? What are you doing? Because if this happened, it's probably going to happen again. So usually we do some backtracking there and try and do a little bit of cleanup. So make sure it doesn't happen again.
If if there's banking fraud and the money is lost through the banking system, who's responsible for trying to track these people down? Is it more of a state level, police type thing, or is it more federal that goes after these people?
That's a good question. I think it's handled at different levels. So, like, every bank has a fraud department. The level of what they go through, really, their job is just to try and recover those funds and see how the fraud occurred. But I bet there's that data that they have. Once they obtain it, they probably hand it off to a higher level, like you said, federal level probably. Because we know that there are departments out there that are looking overseas for these secret locations of people that are scamming in other countries, just stealing people's money. So I think it's an ongoing effort. What the priority of that is compared to other problems that we see across the board and everything else, that I'm not entirely sure. But I mean, it's not like our bank has a SWAT team ready to go raid a house down somewhere in little old Durant, Oklahoma, or anything like that. Sometimes we wish we did, because sometimes some of these cases get a little frustrating. But I think it just depends on what the level is. But I really do think that our fraud department, they do have that information that they hand off once they obtain it to other areas that are a little bit higher up.
As you are now beginning to start thinking to yourself, where have I seen her face before? And so now we're going to reveal what you used to do before you got into banking. You were on television for 5.5 years in the Sherman-Denison area, and as a meteorologist, you were the morning weather girl. We've heard your voice on many radio stations as well. And the station was a Fox, or was CBS, or was it both at the time?
It was a CBS affiliate station.
CBS affiliate, okay. So now we're going to talk about the weather behind the scenes, because now we have a retired meteorologist. You were schooled at the University of Oklahoma in, what's the name of that city again?
Norman.
Norman, yes. And Norman's important because that's where the National Weather Center is located, essentially on campus right there. Mm-hmm. And so Wava got to be trained at the National Weather Center, world headquarters. I got to visit that building one time on a tour, and that school and training at that National Weather Center is a hard gig, folks. Let me tell you, there's some ways people can call themselves a meteorologist, and then there's real meteorologists that we have here. This gives Wava a lot of insight to help us understand what is really going on with the weather and the power that the weather person has in your life. The first thing is describe the building. That fascinated me. It seems, if I remember, that building could take like a tornado Category 5 hit and still be standing. Am I right about that memory, or wasn't that building super fortified?
They did construct it to be able to take on a pretty good force. I don't know if it was that high of a category, but the basement construction that it has, I wouldn't say that the building would stay fully standing, but it was meant to house a lot of people to protect them during whatever storm would be coming through, whether it was a Category 4 tornado. One thing that was really fascinating about the building is they have that observatory deck up top, and usually when there would be a severe storm nearby, you're supposed to be taking cover, stay away from the windows, things like that. All the meteorologists would run upstairs to that observatory deck because you're 6 stories up, and you're basically at eye level with a lot of those storms just off into the distance, and you get a really good look at those storms there. In between each of the floors, too, because there is so much data that is flowing through that building, that means there's a lot of cabling that's going on as well. So even though you're up 5 or 6 stories, it's actually almost double that, the distance between each of the floors, because between each of those floors is where they had all that important cabling running through the whole building there to feed all of the computers and the radars, everything else, to be able to fit it all in there. It's kind of nice how they disguised it throughout the building.
And it took a certain level of security clearance to even get into this building. Mm-hmm. They protect their technology, almost as if it reminded me of some kind of a military type of approach, how valuable the weather knowledge is, or what perhaps the amount of destruction a weather event can bring to a community could be more than some bomb going off. And so therefore it almost, they took their job very seriously at protecting people. And I think ultimately, the value you played in a community was it gave people a sense of confidence during a storm, during anything. There could be some big thing falling out of the sky, and they would ask you guys what it was. If the ground shook, and we've been through some earthquakes up there, I assume you've felt them too. I think that time you were a meteorologist, or was it when you were at school, Oklahoma had one of its largest earthquakes ever recorded. Wasn't that a 5-point something or other? I think we had.
Yeah, we were near the epicenter, and that was pretty insane because I had never experienced an earthquake until then too. Which it's been pretty laid back since then. Hasn't been as active, but that was a really interesting year. But that was where you walked outside because you could feel the aftershock. There was one earthquake that happened, and we felt more of the aftershock, but then there was that larger one, that 4 or 5 scale that you're talking about, and we were closer to the epicenter. When you walked outside, you could literally see the ground moving, cars shaking. It wasn't to the extent where it was breaking down buildings or housing or anything like that, but it's enough to rattle the walls, and it was pretty impressive, that's for sure. But the National Weather Center, the building it was built for the community to serve. So when there was a threat of a tornado, especially nearby, a lot of people who didn't have a storm cellar at their home, they would go out of their way to drive to the National Weather Center and go into their basement area because they have a whole hallway or two, a whole section that's meant to hold a lot of people to protect them from those larger tornadoes, to keep them underground.
So it still may be one of the most secure buildings we have in the United States, other than military places. Like I know the Pentagon has Kevlar even built into its outer shell right now. But this is amazing how serious the weather industry can be. Now, there is different types of meteorology interest. We have the media person. We have people who work within the government offices and collecting that data and putting these weather forecasts and reports out. And what are some of the other specialties in meteorology that you're aware of?
So I've actually done a lot of career talks when I would go to schools and discuss with kids about the career of meteorology in general. And a lot of the times you don't have to go on TV if you don't want to. Besides broadcast meteorology, where you're pointing at the green screen, telling the public what the weather is going to be for the day, airports really need meteorologists. That's where sometimes you have them sitting in the air traffic controlling towers to help monitor the weather behaviors that are going on to make sure these airplanes don't fly into any microbursts or anything like that. Military always is needing meteorologists as well. Majority of the branches do heavily offer programs like that. You can work for private businesses too. So if you want to go work for UPS or FedEx, they've got their own staff of meteorologists as well to help monitor those forecasts, especially when it comes to them moving packages across the U.S. So there's lots of different elements there. It doesn't have to just fall under going on TV. Even if you want to become a professor and just continue on research, if there's a particular topic of weather that you're just highly attracted to, you could continue that as well.
So, and the majority of people actually didn't go into the media, not feeling comfortable in front of cameras or having just deeper interest to get into more research. Mm-hmm. What's it like in a typical day of a meteorologist when you were on television helping hundreds of thousands of people get through their day? Tell us what time you had to wake up and what was your typical task for that day?
So in broadcast, when it comes to TV, you have your extreme shifts. This isn't a typical job where you're 9 to 5, you check in, you check out, you're done for the day. The show is based around when people are home. So you either have your morning show, which was where I was at the time, where we have our morning broadcast trying to catch people before they're heading out the door to go to work. And then you have your evening show where people are starting to tune in when they're home for dinner, cooking, things like that, sitting around the TV. So my shift being the morning shift, I went into work. It was probably about 3 to 4 a.m. It just depended on the time if there was severe weather or not. I would go in at about 4 a.m. and there was another morning meteorologist that I worked alongside with, and him and I would look at forecast models for the day, see what weather pattern we're having to deal with if there was anything at the time. Sometimes during the summer, things just get a little dead, and then the weather can get quote-unquote boring, so you have to kind of get creative with what you're going to present during the show at the time. But him and I would compare numbers because sometimes I would see a high for the day being 85, and then he might see something being 77. So if we had an extreme difference in our numbers, and we would kind of discuss it and see what models we were each looking at and kind of go from there, because we wanted to have our numbers to be consistent. So usually get in by 4 a.m., look at forecast models, put together your show. We did a lot in the morning where we had to record radio recordings as well because you have these contracts with these radio stations. So like right now, sitting here in front of a microphone, I would have a script of what my forecast numbers were for the day, and I would have so many recordings per radio station that I had to record and mail off, or I say mail off like it is old school, email to them. And they would all have to sound different, so you have to change it up every single time. And then once that was done, you also had to upload your teleprompter script. So because of the hearing impaired, we are required to have the wording go up on the bottom of the screen there in case there's someone that is hearing impaired and they have to have that. So we would have to type up a forecast as well that had to get uploaded into the system. Even though it wouldn't be something we were saying exactly every single time, that would be at least what the forecast would be. So if someone needed to read it on the screen while they were watching our show, they could. So once all of that was done, then I would go get ready for the show, do my hair, makeup, because usually that early in the morning, I don't do it before I would come into work. So I'd get everything done, go get myself ready, and then the show would start. So you throw on your microphone and just go to town after that. You have your pockets for weather during the show. Sometimes you would get a minute, 30 seconds. Sometimes you would get 2. There are times sometimes a show wouldn't load or a news clip that a reporter had to go get, their show wouldn't load. So you would wear an IFB in your ear that you would have the producer talking into your ear that says, hey, you need to talk a little bit longer. They would say stretch. So you have to be able to talk and listen at the same time. So sometimes you'd have to talk for 3 minutes about the weather. But in a nutshell, that would be it.
So ultimately, people would see you just for a few minutes here and there, but they just don't realize it's endless busyness behind the scenes, preparing and trying to be accurate. And you had pretty good track record of being more accurate than I think others. There's a certain amount of intuitiveness, I guess, that comes into looking at a forecast, common sense. Sometimes did you guys just go out and look out the window and see if what the models were saying seemed to be realistic?
Yeah.
Did it come down to that?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, but sometimes we would joke and we would look at radar. A radar might be down, and we would go, it's showing it's not raining, but we would look outside and we would see rain obviously falling. So we go, okay, well, we got to figure out how to report this because it's not showing up on radar. So we got to be able to show people what's going on outside. But yeah, there's a lot more to it. And I mean, there are definitely times that a forecast can get completely busted, as we would say. But that's the beauty of weather or just nature in general. I mean, we have all these forecast models that we can look at, all these calculations that go into putting in a forecast, but sometimes there are just these elements that you just can't predict, and they would happen, and that sometimes will just throw your numbers off, and then you just kind of have to dust yourself off and start over for the next day. But it's not like it would be life-threatening by any means. Sometimes frustrating for some viewers. I mean, we had a lot of farmers in the area, so if we said, for example, that it wasn't going to rain for 4 days, and if they needed to cut hay for their field, and hay has to take a day or 2 to fully dry out before they can gather it, but if it rains after you've cut it, then it's ruined because it gets moldy. So sometimes that didn't happen very often, but it has happened. So, but you just do the best that you can. And
well, it's a forgiving profession.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's countries where they've arrested or charged people who mispredicted a volcano that erupted or an earthquake that came that they should have been warned about, and that was the job of that. I guess it's still kind of a meteorologist even in that area. But our country is, you get it wrong, but we know you're human, at least get us close, and that was good enough. The life and the day of a television station also allowed you to be exposed with the team, and so you had a news team there, you had human interest stories. Today, there's a lot of negative perspectives about the media, especially big name stations. Did years ago, because you've been out of weather now, 4 or 5 years at least, something like that. Did you sense bias where stories were tempered or told a certain way when news was read, or did you not sense any of that then?
So yes and no, but it depended on where the story came from. So because we were a CBS affiliate, we would have our local stories for our viewing area where we had our little reporters go out and get their story, interview their people, put their story together and present that story during the show. And usually our reporters, they did a fairly good job to stay on the neutral side. It just depended on what the story was, but that's the mission of journalism. You just report the facts, but you can't choose a side. You've got to be direct. So the reporters always did their best to try and keep everything neutral. But when you get to the larger media, when it comes to the larger networks, the national coverage, you have your bigger stories, especially when it comes to politics. You start to see some affiliates lean more towards one side versus the other, and they're not showing everything. They just show you kind of more of what they just want to show you for whatever party they're leaning towards. So bringing it down then to a micro scale, because we were a CBS affiliate, we have these stories that we're supposed to share. So we just air what we're supposed to air, what we're told, and so sometimes it can make it look like we're being biased on that end, but it wasn't done on purpose necessarily. And because of the station I worked at, I mean, it was small. We had a lot of people that were straight out of college that are learning still. So we had reporters that sometimes would make mistakes. I can't say that I was perfect either. Starting in weather, I made a lot of mistakes too as you're continuing onward there. But they learn as they go, and sometimes it's hard when you're reporting a story that you're trying to present the facts of what actually happened, but it looks very one-sided. I mean, let's say that you're going to cover a murder charge, the person could possibly be innocent, but all you have is material that shows that they're being guilty, so sometimes you just have to find a balance there, but they do the best that they can. But they're definitely not doing it on purpose. At least the smaller.
We know there's bias, but we do have a sense that it does come from higher up and filters down to these mega individuals that own these, and if it's going to be anywhere, it's going to be in the politics part of it.
Yeah.
One of the most important things, and we'll be wrapping up on weather, is the empowering of people to figure things out on their own. People can use the web for all kinds of things right now. Even just using a good quality Google Earth to bring up clouds and see for yourself where the hurricane is. There's a lot of people who are acting like meteorologists now without training, but they have some amazing skills. Maybe they're watching the sun for us, and they're connected to all kinds of satellites. We have some things that the biggest thing people are concerned about is the long-term climate change story. We know summer it gets hot, winter it gets cold, and people who say to us, hey, there's a trend downward, the truth that there's been less forest fires. For instance, the United States is experiencing 90% decline of forest fires this year. But they tell us that worldwide trend is downward for fires. We have the biggest thing, though, is the temperature of the planet. Everybody wants to know what that's doing. And I'm told that the most accurate way of measuring the temperature right now is by satellite. And they can bounce down and tell you the surface temperature, or so high up we can measure it over a city, measure it in the middle of the ocean, and not rely on ground-based thermometers and reporting. And then massive amounts of data can be collected hourly. And that data, I understand, has been collected and analyzed, and for a few decades of information now, the global temperature of the planet. Imagine you say, and this was the average temperature of the entire planet for an entire year. One number, one planet. People are doing that with massive computing, and I don't know if these are coming from just genius people in their basement who have an amazing amount of time to give us this gift of information, but they tell us that the temperature of the planet has been stable for a few decades now, that there's really no significant movement whatsoever. Sure, there's more records being set in the winter, as are the summer in terms of these extremes on here. Do you think that people need to be worried about having accurate information on their own, or should we just let the system play itself out and science eventually will win, knowing the power of the National Weather Center, the power of the government that controls them, versus the power of us individuals to go find the data on our own? Do you recommend people do some of their own research on trying to find weather patterns, or just stay with the TV and the radio and be happy with that and just have the comfort, in your opinion, that the weather really isn't in some decline on a global basis? What do you feel?
So this is what attracted me so much with weather is we do our best to predict what it's going to do, but it is such a force that can do whatever it wants. It's constantly changing. And so the beauty of it is that with weather, if people want to go look on their own at forecast models, look at patterns, I mean, I will never discourage somebody to do that. There's no secret behind that. Now, what to do with that data, or if you are able to interpret any of that, is something different. So what I've always had seen when I was working at the station was you would have your years where I remember during my internship, there was one summer that we had so many consecutive days in a row where we were hitting the high of over 100 degrees, and we were in an extreme drought. Everything was hot. It was just dry. It was gross, and it was miserable. But then we've had summers where we never hardly hit 100 degrees, and then we would see plenty of rain. But like this summer right now, we've been pretty hot once again, haven't been seeing much rain. But the drought conditions have actually been a little bit different. I'm not a huge fan of averages, to be honest with you. It depends on the type of time frame that you have in the area. So like you said, when on a global scale, if we're averaging a temperature, you're breaking down so much data to one number. And that is just, it's such a lie sometimes, because you're taking an average from one area, let's say in New York, that have their particular numbers, and you're comparing it to numbers in Texas and off to California. Like that doesn't make sense. It's not a good way to look at things at a micro to a macro scale. I'm not going to say that we are doomed or things are changing. It doesn't hurt to educate yourself, but when it comes to fully understanding the weather pattern, then you understand it. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to try and go out yourself and try and tell people what's going on with the weather? Or you can't change it. That's the thing, is it's a pretty much uncontrollable situation. We're here, we're living on a planet that is a living being, and it's going to do what it's going to do. Now, I know that you probably have your opinions too, and we all do, about there are certain things that the quote-unquote government does to try and influence weather patterns. There are airplanes we've tried to create clouds to help influence certain weather situations, to help rain or create shade, anything like that. But in general, still fully on a global aspect, we cannot fully control what the weather does. So it's going to do what it's going to do. I'm not scared that we're going to start seeing temperatures get hotter or colder, or oceanic levels rising or falling, anything like that, because technically in our lifetime, that's not going to be something that's going to fully affect us that much.
So folks, look out the window in the morning. That still might be the best thing. Stick your finger in the air and let's see what happens. Okay, that is going to wrap up today's great show. And there is a very interesting twist to my deep thought of the day. I know some people in the studio with me right now are rolling their eyes, but a deep thought might be, where have you seen this person before? And it also is that maybe she looks a little bit like me, because this is my daughter, Wava Keeling. And so now you know the rest of the story. So with that, good day, America.